Suicide takes the lives of nearly 40,000 Americans every year. 15% of those who are clinically depressed die by suicide. Many who attempt suicide never seek professional care. After cancer and heart disease, suicide accounts for more years of lives lost than any other cause of death. Why is this? Why do people feel that the only way out is death? Why do people feel that this is the last resort?
I'm Dan O'Neill.
I'm Carol Whitman.
I have a Psy.D in clinical psychology.
I have a PhD in psychology.
And I'm a professor here in counseling and human development.
And I've been in practice since 1982. Currently have a private practice. I work with adolescent through adult age people. I have a specialty in addictions and families of addiction.
Depression and suicide, of course, are inextricably linked. And we really think about suicide, for the most part, as a symptom of severe depression. So, as you probably know, depression is a serious mood disorder, but extremely common, in which a person experiences persistent sadness over a long period of time. And this is often punctuated by periods of trouble sleeping. People have problems with their appetite. They might gain or lose weight without really trying. They have disturbances in their energy level. They feel fatigued all the time. They have problems in their relationships. They feel angry. They feel irritable. It's a really just a terrible, horrible way to feel. And sometimes, as a symptom of the serious mood problem and depression, people will experience thoughts of suicide.
Suicide is a symptom of depression. Not everybody that's depressed is suicidal. And not everybody that has suicidal ideation or thoughts of suicide actually goes ahead and attempts suicide. The more depressed somebody is, that does not up somebody's chances for being suicidal. Somewhere in the middle, when people still have life energy, the ability to think and plan is when suicidal ideation becomes very prevalent. So suicide is chronic, obsessive thoughts about the desire to end one's life. It is paired with a great deal of hopelessness, where somebody cannot figure out a reason to want to live.
Suicide is one of those things that just seems to me, in most situations, to be a terrible tragedy and a terrible loss. And that's particularly true, I think, with young people. I think, as a psychologist, the thing that I worry about the most is someone experiencing a depression in their college years, for instance, and if that were to end in suicide, I'd see that as a terrible loss and a terrible tragedy. And you really have to try to put yourself in the shoes of a seriously depressed person. And I think that sometimes a good analogy for this is the idea of putting on a pair of dark sunglasses. Mm-hmm. So you and I are walking around, and even it's not a great day today outside, but when we look outside, we might still see the beautiful autumn leaves. We might see the beauty even in a rainy day. Mm-hmm. If we were to put on really dark glasses, though, we look outside and all we're going to see is darkness. And that's very analogous to the way somebody with a serious depression looks at the world. They look at the world as a very dark place. And they think about themselves, they think about their future in very dark ways. Things are not going to get better. There is no hope. They feel very hopeless, and they experience a lot of despair. And I think that if you've never experienced something like that, it's very hard to relate to. It's the enormity of that sense of despair or hopelessness is hard to fathom if you've never experienced it. So I think that when you put yourself sort of behind the eyes or in the shoes of somebody with a serious depression, then suicide seems a little bit more understandable, because they think, this is never going to end. I'm always going to feel this way. I'm always going to feel this bad and this hopeless. My problems are overwhelming. They can't get better. I'm being a burden to other people. And this is a concern that you hear a lot. My friends and family would be better without me. And I often will say to people, if we're talking about suicide, I'll say to them, what do you think happens to families after someone commits suicide? And of course, those people's lives are over too, ostensibly. The tragedy of losing somebody in your family to suicide is enormous. And they're affected for the rest of their lives.
For me, when a person comes in and is very suicidal, they're to me in a heartbreaking state because they have so little hopelessness. My goal or my hope for a patient that comes in to see me that has suicidal ideation is that I can help them create hope, create possibility in life. So I don't really have an opinion on suicide. I have a hope for the person that is so laden with despair. So when somebody is at the point where they have absolutely decided this is it, they have no hope, that their firm belief is that nothing is worth living for, that nothing will ever get them to feel any sense of productivity, self-worth, ability to see ahead, that if they can just get over that obstacle, they'll feel better. The word that comes up for me is they kind of have a romantic notion of death, but they don't pair death with the finality of actually, this is it. Once I die, there's nothing. So sometimes they can't see past it because they want to experience that kind of romantic notion that we pair with death. Well, I think there's a social stigma to mental health. Suicide is a mental health symptom. And there's a social stigma to mental health. People don't categorize issues with mental health as real diseases. So if somebody has cancer, people have a lot of sympathy. But people with mental health diseases and mental health disorders or diseases, people have not wrapped their head around the fact that it's a disease, that it is not within somebody's reach. So people see mental health issues as pathetic, as something, if you were smarter, sharper, less self-indulgent, you would take care of. So if people would get more realistic and more knowledgeable about the truth, people would be much more tolerant of things like suicidal ideation, suicide attempts, and all the other symptoms that go along with mental health. But mental health must and should be embraced as a disease.
Suicide really confounds us in that way. It's hard to imagine, again, when we're feeling well, it's hard to imagine wanting to end your life. Mm-hmm. There's always tomorrow. Mm-hmm. There's better things coming ahead. I don't want to leave the people I love. Mm-hmm. But again, when you feel depressed, those are not the way, those things don't make sense, and that's not the way people conceive of the world. But I think it offends people in some way, and it frightens people. And I think that's been one of the big impediments to having more open conversation, is that it's so frightening. People feel that, they feel like, what would I do if somebody told me they were going to commit suicide, or how would I handle that? It feels overwhelming. And so frightening that they feel like, oh, it's better off to just kind of let that go. Often, when somebody is seriously thinking about suicide, being able to have a conversation about it is such a relief. They feel enormously relieved that they can actually say out loud the things that they're struggling with inside. So I think openness and conversation is a big help. Encouraging people to reach out to professional help is also a key. So students who worry about roommates or friends, encouraging them to come to the counseling center, to call the counseling center to get help from a family physician can be really useful.
In capital letters, get help. Don't keep it to yourself. The more you keep it within yourself, the more you stay silent, the more you're embarrassed by it. It becomes bigger and darker and bigger and darker. You must reach out. There's a million ways to get help, even if you start by talking to a friend or a relative. If you want to be more anonymous and you talk to a school counselor, even a doctor that you go to who can refer you. The point is, start talking. Just start talking.
All of us need to take care of our mood. And we can do that in a lot of different ways. One is by having good relationships, by managing our stress. And you know, college is enormously stressful. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. But managing that stress with behavioral things, lifestyle things, getting enough exercise, making sure you eat well, sleep well, things like that can really help protect our mood. And avoiding, abusing substances.
There's going to be somebody that listens, and you're going to feel connected to. The minute you feel connected to somebody, to something, your depression's going to lift. But get help. If you know that somebody else is depressed, you just simply reach out and you just say, you're not right, I know something's going on, something's funky about you, how can I help? Reach out. And if they let you know that they're depressed, say, God, that's really terrible. Well, do you need help getting help? Who can I help refer you to talk to? Can you talk to me? Reach out, get help. That's the bottom line. Don't be alone in it. The loneliness leads to despair. That's the bottom line.